Okay, so welcome then to Island Heritage. This is the third part of the story of Newport, really. And we'll just have a little revisit to the last couple of sessions, or the last session. So if you were not able to come, obviously, then this is a little bit of an overview for you. So we looked at, in the last session, sort of the death and destruction of what once had been this up until then prosperous and growing settlement of Newport, the new port, as it were. We talked about the French attacking, sort of the most notorious occasion perhaps being in 1377, attacking the castle itself, and then the kind of provenance of Node Hill being Noddy's Hill, where the garrison chased the French invaders down through from Carisbrooke and then ambushed them around perhaps Node Hill and Trafalgar Road. We then talked about the plague, and again the where we kind of get that the God's providence, the tea room just by the church there, and why it's called that. And it was perhaps said to be the last place that the plague actually stopped at, didn't go any further, and it was God's providence therefore that occurred, so hence the name for that. And we talked about Church Lytton and the fact that that was then consecrated as a cemetery inside Newport, because previous to that the bodies were taken up that steep hill to Carisbrooke Church, which was the parish church, and therefore where everybody was buried at that time. The plague obviously came, and the extra sort of need then to bury more people meant that a grave site nearer to Newport itself was needed. So Church Lytton fulfilled that and was made sort of as the cemetery in the late 16th century. So that was kind of where we were at. So we were back getting some perhaps feeling that Newport had gone through this time of prosperity previously, and then it had come to a point where actually not a lot of people were living there, and we had this kind of death and destruction, almost bringing it back to square one, having to restart. So this is kind of where we're going to take up the story now. And because of everything that happened previously, in 1559, Sir Francis Knollys looked into the decline of the town and wanted to know why Newport had declined so severely, and what they could actually do perhaps to it to enhance it, and or the prospects for it going forward. So we had the development of the harbour around this sort of time, the 1580s. We had Cowes now being a trade point, sort of victualling station, I suppose, for passing shipping at that time. And then we didn't have Cowes as a settlement as we would know it at that time. It would come down through the river into Newport itself. The Cowes would actually develop a bit further down the line. So we're beginning to see ways in which we could perhaps see Newport actually regaining its status and regaining its importance, and perhaps some of its prosperity back. So again, another way in which this was perhaps helped along the way. It's said to be that brewing was partly responsible for this prosperity, and then the trade with obviously with that. We've got the Mew Langton's site on Holyrood and Crocker Street from the late 1500s, and we can tell that that was actually a site of importance for brewing further back in time. We've got some archaeological evidence close to the site which has been attributed to a brew site. If I get my pointer up for you. This is taken from the Isle of Wight Natural History and Archaeological Society proceedings, where this archaeological excavation is documented, and it sort of tells you here. So we've got the Lukeley Brook running here. Right. We've got Holyrood Street down here, and we can see it was this sort of area here. This is the trench. St Cross Mill is here. So it's kind of like the Lidl site really now. and this is where its potential that another, it's quite a large brewing site was found, and the archaeological evidence is there that suggests that as well. So not sort of too far removed along from up here where the new Langton site was, as we went down towards what would now be sort of further on up here, the industrial estate itself. So we've got two. Sorry, Pat.
That's incredible.
It is, yeah, and that's why archaeology is fantastic, because yeah, it just kind of pieces all these things together. So we've got kind of two things there. We've got the fact that we've increased shipping, increased trade is passing through cows, passing then down through into Newport, being able to trade in these goods, being able to trade potentially in brewing as well for the victualling of these ships as they pass. So we're beginning to see a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, for Newport, that it can actually kind of rebuild itself. And as part of Nolly's report, he suggested that there should be the appointment of some good learned man to be schoolmaster and bring up the youth in learning and virtue. They hoped that then would filter down in through society and actually begin to create a sense of inspiration and a gentleman's class, as it were, in the area, because it was really failing, as it were, socially. And they wanted it to rebuild itself in that way. And that's when we start to get these larger stone-built houses in Newport. And this is the Newport Grammar School site, which comes from 1614, and it still remains obviously one of the oldest buildings in the town. It's a grade 2 plus listed. It's a really, really important site, actually. And I know that there is ongoing works to support that is preservation and conservation as an important site, and right in the centre there of Newport. There would have been other sites as well, other stone-built buildings at this time, again following that grid line pattern that we saw before with Speed's map. Again, with this kind of whole sense of being able to rebuild, which is actually a nationwide thing, with prosperity in agriculture across the whole of the nation at that time. We've got the town hall kind of looking a little bit like we might know it today, which would have been the audit house, being rebuilt in stone again at this time. So it would have been a wooden building previously, close to the Newport marketplace. And that there is a Thomas Rowlandson picture from the collection of the Isle of Wight Council's Museums and Archaeological Service. And this is the view from St Thomas's Square looking towards that market house, which was then later replaced and built into the Guildhall of 1815, designed by John Nash, which is the building that we see today in the Guildhall, obviously at the bottom end there of the High Street. And these Thomas Rowlandson pictures really give a sense of what society was like as well in Newport at this time. You can actually sort of start to pick out some of the individuals. This is a really key point here. A uniformed man there. Just that hustle and bustle, you feel that actually this is a prosperous place again. People are using the market. They've got that ability to want to come and spend some money and actually trading goods as well. So it does look like it's back to perhaps some of its, or perhaps exceeding some of its earlier prosperity, and really back on track to rebuilding itself back up and being the important site that it should be. So those are really great little pictures to show how the people of the place are actually experiencing it as well, which is really important. Oh, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, they don't look as they look more prosperous, don't they?
Yes.
The people dress
That's
better.
it. Absolutely, yes, they are. And this, again, it just really shows you that in those pictures.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's why they're really important sort of evidence for us to be able to piece together those bits and pieces. So yeah, let's have a look. What do we got? So next, so we're going to talk about up until this time the Newport didn't have its own water supply, which is actually, and when I found this out, it was quite extraordinary really. The water was brought down from Carisbrooke in carts. Can you imagine the amount of water that would have been needed at this time? And it's being brought down, this fresh water supply, not having it piped down into the town, not having any pumps or water readily available. So there were a number of attempts to actually pipe water into the town. 1618, Philip Fleming was granted a lease to break up the streets so as to bring wholesome spring water to the town through trunks. This was actually never completed. Another chap has a go in 1621. Unfortunately, Andrew James also failed as well. The references there are some documents that are held in the county records that actually talk about these endeavours. So until actually all the way through this period, so not until 1846 was there a scheme that actually did succeed. And what you can see there on the right is actually part of that Stuart pipe system, which was found during some excavation work in a couple of places, actually in Pyle Street and High Street. You can read more about that in the report from Tomlin and Scaife, as it says there. But that's a really, again, just a lovely piece of archaeological evidence to show this trunk here and the pipe that it would have become, and that water trying to, be pumped into the town through that. So some kind of innovation going on as well at this time. Yes. So these guys are obviously quite prosperous merchants in the town and wanting to use some of their prosperity and investing in the town. So actually perhaps feeling a little bit of they want to give back to their community as well in that society. So it kind of all shows and contributes towards the fact that we are seeing Newport really being back on the map, as it were, and back on the up, and kind of pulling itself back from that sort of 14th century and 15th century death and destruction that we saw earlier.
It seems incredible that Newport didn't have any water until
it is, and it wasn't as well as it had declined, but it wasn't obviously back at this sort of point, another sort of couple hundred years after that time. It was still a large place, and with all the of the brewing activity that we talked about that's ongoing as well at that time, to not have piped water, it's quite extraordinary.
And incredible.
Yeah, it is actually. It is. Yeah, I when I first became aware of it, it was just really quite a thing. And so late as well. 1846 is really quite late to have that water pipe system in place. So it's really quite an interesting one, that as well. And what's also was really interesting is when I was able to actually see part of this trunk. So the museum service do actually have some of this that was excavated. So that was quite wonderful in the collection.
Yeah, incredible.
Well. It is.